The first sound that night was not a scream, and not the sharp crack of a whip. It was smaller than that, softer. The tap of a loose shutter against the side of the big house, the restlessness of old wood in a rising wind. The fields lay under a heavy, waiting sky, the last orange of sunset drained away, leaving only a smear of dull red along the horizon. The day's heat still clung to the earth, but the air above had begun to cool, and in that narrow space between warmth and chill, the whole plantation seemed to hold its breath. Down near the line of rough cabins, the slave quarters huddled like dark, tired animals. Inside, bodies lay stretched on straw pallets and narrow planks, limbs aching from work that never ended. Some whispered prayers. Some stared at the ceiling and tried not to think at all. The smell of sweat, damp wood, and leftover smoke from the evening fires mixed into a single, low cloud of fatigue. Outside one of those cabins, a man sat with his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, his arms resting loosely across them. His name was Isaac. He was taller than most, with broad shoulders and hands that looked as if they had been carved for the task of moving the world. Years of work in the fields had carved new lines into his body, had laid scars over scars, but his gaze. There was a stillness in him that others noticed. Old Eben, who had seen more seasons than most, said Isaac had a quiet made of iron. Tonight, that quiet felt thinner than usual. He listened to the sounds drifting down from the big house, laughter, the faint clinking of glass, a piano playing a tune that sounded almost cheerful if the master, Nathaniel Hollister, had guests again. Whenever there were guests, the air on the plantation changed. It became sharper, more dangerous, as if every word could be overheard, every glance misread. From where he sat, Isaac could see the silhouette of the house against the sky. The white columns turned dark in the night, the long porch like a row of teeth. Light spilled from the tall windows, making bright rectangles on the ground. They looked like doors to a different world, one he had never been invited to enter. Behind Isaac, inside the cabin, others were already lying down. A soft snore came from the far corner. Someone coughed, then stifled it. A baby whimpered, then fell quiet as a tired mother hummed a few slow, broken notes of a song she half remembered from another place, another life. Isaac rested his head against the wall and let his eyes close for a moment. His wrists still remembered the bite of rope from earlier that week, when Randall had decided someone was moving too slowly and needed reminding. The skin had mostly stopped throbbing, but when he flexed his fingers, the ghosts of that pain woke up again. He could live with that. He had lived with worse. Pain was another tool here. A way to count the days that had not ended him. Isaac, came a whispered voice from the doorway. You sleeping? He opened his eyes. A small figure stood there, half in the dim light of the cabin, half in shadow, Ruth, no more than 17, with a scarf tied hurriedly over her hair and worry etched into the corners of her mouth. Not yet, he answered, his voice low. What is it? She glanced toward the house, then hurried the rest of the way outside, crouching next to him, wrapping her arms around her knees as if she were trying to make herself smaller. They say something went missing, she breathed. From up there. She jerked her chin toward the big house. Money, maybe. Or some lady's trinkets. I heard two of the house girls talking when they thought nobody was near. Isaac's jaw tightened. And Randall's mad. Real mad. The name tasted sour as she said it. He'd been storming around all evening, asking questions, looking at everybody like he already decided who did it. Isaac had never seen Randall truly calm. The overseer moved like a man always listening for an insult that had not yet been spoken. He carried his whip the way others might carry a walking stick. To him, flesh was something to be shaped into obedience. People steal, Isaac said quietly. When they got nothing, they reach where they can. Maybe somebody got desperate. Maybe somebody foolish. He paused. But the master don't care about why. No, he don't, Ruth agreed. And when he don't care why, Randall gets to choose how. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant clang of metal from the kitchen yard, the fading notes of a piano, a burst of laughter from someone who had never seen the inside of a field at sunrise. Then, faintly, the sound of boots on the gravel path. Ruth stiffened. They coming this way, she whispered. Isaac heard it too. More than one pair of boots, moving with purpose. He pushed himself up to stand, feeling the heaviness in his legs from a day spent bent over rows of cotton. His heart sped up, but his face stayed calm. Panic did not help. It never had. The door of the cabin swung open before he could step back inside. Yellow lamplight spilled in, cutting a harsh rectangle through the darkness. Silhouetted in the doorway stood Randall, tall and lean, his hat casting his eyes in shadow. Behind him were two of his men, carrying lanterns and the hard, hungry expressions of those who enjoyed being on the side that held the rope. "On your feet," Randall barked. "All of you. Move." Inside, bodies scrambled to obey. Men and women pushed themselves upright, blinking in the sudden light, hands instinctively finding their sides, their children, each other. The baby began to cry in earnest. Randall's gaze swept the room once, then fixed on Isaac as if it had always known where it was going to land. "You," he said. Isaac met his eyes. "Yes, sir." Outside. There were 100 things he could have said then. That he had been here all evening. That he had not set foot near the house. That there were others closer, others with more reason, others who might have taken whatever had gone missing. All of them would have sounded like excuses. He stepped past Ruth, who pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her fingers curled tight into the fabric of her skirt. As he moved, she caught his sleeve for the briefest second, a barely there touch. He felt it like a hand reaching for him from the edge of a cliff. Then he was outside, and the door slammed shut behind him. The stars were faint, swallowed by clouds moving in from the low hills. Randall's lantern cast a restless circle of light around them, making the world beyond it feel even darker. The overseer looked Isaac up and down, as if trying to decide which part of him would bruise the easiest. "Master's looking for answers," he said. "You were close to the house yesterday. Helping in the yard. You remember that?" "Yes, sir." "I remember. Things went missing after that. You remember that too?" Isaac hesitated for half a heartbeat. "I heard talk, sir. That's all." Randall tilted his head. "You know what happens to a man out here when money goes missing? When the master's temper gets turned up like a stove and don't have nowhere to go." Isaac said nothing. "He finds someone to put it on," Randall continued, his voice softening in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. "He can't slap the air, can he? Anger's gotta land on skin. That's just how things are." Two of the other men stepped closer, as if on cue. Isaac knew then that this was not a question. "You look like you can take it," Randall added almost conversationally. "You been tarkeen it for years, ain't you? Might as well be you. The others, they fragile. Break too easy. Master don't like that. He needs his hands." He gestured with the lantern toward the path that led up the slope to the big house. But they did not go to the front steps or the wide porch where guests laughed and drank under the glow of polished lamps. Randall led the way around the side, past the kitchen yard and the well, toward a smaller, squatter shape tucked partly into the earth. Isaac had seen that door before. Everybody had. It was thick and low, banded with iron. Children were warned to stay away from it. Older folks crossed themselves or looked down whenever they passed it. It led, they all knew, to the place under the house where the air smelled wrong and no sound ever came back out the way it went in. The cellar. The rat's place. "Sir," Isaac said quietly, stopping just short of the door. "I don't know anything about Master's money. I didn't touch it. That's the truth." Randall laughed, a short burst of sound that held no humor at all. "Truth," he said. "You talking to the wrong man about truth. I ain't here for truth. I'm here for order." He nodded to the others. Rough hands grabbed Isaac's arms, twisting them behind his back. Rope bit into his wrists, pulled viciously tight. The burn of it shot straight up his arms and into his shoulders. For one weightless second, a thought floated through Isaac's mind: run. He could throw his weight backward, slam one of the men into the ground, break free from the rope before it cinched tight. He could sprint toward the rows of trees, the distant line of the river, the darkness beyond the edge of the property, the unknown. He could die there, in the open, under the sky. Not in a hole. Then he pictured Ruth's face. Old Eben's shaky hands. The others who would be there tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. If he ran, the anger would not disappear, it would simply look for another body. His body was already chosen. So he did not run. The door creaked as Randall pulled it open. A wave of air rolled out, damp, sour, layered with the smell of stone that never saw the sun, and something else. A sharp, animal tang that prickled at the back of the throat. A faint skittering sound came from the darkness below. Then another. Then many. Isaac's heart thudded once, hard. Down, Randall ordered. Careful on the steps. Wouldn't want you breaking your neck before the night even starts. They guided him down the narrow stone stairs, his bound hands making it clumsy and slow. The lantern swung, throwing wild shadows along the walls. The cellar widened at the bottom, a low, broad space with a floor of packed earth and stone. Wooden beams held up the ceiling like ribs. In the edges of the light, dark shapes darted in and out of view. Eyes glinted, tiny and numerous. The rats were already watching. Isaac swallowed. His mouth was dry. "You ever been down here, Isaac?" Randall asked, though it was clear he already knew the answer. "No, sir. Some say this used to be a place for storing food," the overseer said lazily, lowering the lantern until it hung just above the ground. "Corn, smoked meat, flour. Cool and dry. Till the rats came. They come in small numbers at first. Then more. Then more. Hard to keep 'em out, once they find a way in." He smiled, an expression slow and bright and terrible. "Now we store something else," he finished. "Fear. That's what stays here now." He turned to the two men beside him. "Leave him in the middle," he instructed. "Tie his ankles if you have to. Make sure he stays put." They shoved Isaac toward the center of the room. His feet slid on the uneven floor. One of the rats shot across his path, a blur of gray and tail, disappearing behind a stone. The movement was so quick he wasn't sure he'd really seen it. They pushed him to his knees. The impact jarred his bones. Rope scratched at his skin as they looped it around his ankles, pulling until his legs were pinned together. He felt suddenly very large and very clumsy, like some trapped animal that could only watch the teeth closing in. Randall stepped closer, the lantern casting his face half in light, half in shadow. "Master wants a message sent," he said. "He don't need to know the details. He'll take care of those. You just need to stay alive long enough to feel what happens when a man forgets his place. Or when we decide he did." Isaac looked up at him. His voice, when it came, was steady. "If I say again I didn't take nothing, that don't change what you're going to do, does it?" Randall's eyes gleamed. "No," he said. "It don't." He crossed the cell, opened a small wooden crate near the wall, and pulled out a metal bowl. From a sack leaning beside it, he poured dry grain and scraps of old bread into the bowl, then placed it at the far corner of the cellar, away from Isaac, away from the circle of light. The rats whirred closer, drawn by the smell. "But here's the thing," Randall added, straightening. "They get fed down here. Just not enough. Not quite. Hunger makes a creature bold. Sharp. It makes them test the edges of what they think they're allowed to touch." He walked back toward the stairs, the lantern swinging in his grip. At the bottom of the steps, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "Spend the night with them," he said. "Maybe by morning you'll remember where you put that money. Maybe you won't." His smile returned, thin as a blade. "Either way, the master gets what he wants." Then he climbed the stairs, the other men following close behind. The light shrank upward, step by step, until it sat near the ceiling. The door groaned shut. The bolt slammed into place with a heavy, final clang. Darkness settled in layers. For a few moments, the gloom still held the memory of the lantern, as if the walls were reluctant to let go of the light. Then even that faded. The cellar filled with a thicker kind of black, one that pressed against Isaac's eyes, his throat, the inside of his skull. He could hear them now. The rats. At first they moved along the edges, skirting the room, their claws making tiny scrapes on stone. They clicked and squeaked softly to one another. He imagined them lifting their sharp noses, gathering the new smell in their narrow chests. Sweat, fear, rope fibers, leather. Human. One of them ventured closer, its small body a whisper against the floor. Isaac could not see it, but he felt it, a slight disturbance in the air near his knee, the faint, dry brush of fur against his trousers as it tested the space he occupied. His muscles tightened. The instinct to kick, to flinch, crackled along his nerves. But his ankles were bound. The only thing he could move freely was his breath. He forced it to slow down. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Somewhere above, life went on. The guests were finishing their drinks, saying their good nights. Doors were closing. Candles were being snuffed one by one, replaced by the quiet, easy sleep of those who knew the walls around them were meant to keep the world out, not to keep them in. In the room down the hall from Hollister's study, a boy lay awake. Thomas Hollister, 12 years old, stared at the ceiling and listened. He had heard voices raised earlier, his father's deep and angry, Randall's lower and smoother, the words muffled by the wood between them. He had not caught the details, but he had seen the look in his father's eyes when he stormed past the dining room. A look that meant somebody else's night was about to get much, much worse. Tom had been raised to look away, to keep to the safe parts of the house, to enjoy his lessons, his books, his pony, and to accept that the world outside the porch was arranged a certain way by men older and stronger than him. But lately, that arrangement had begun to bother him. Sometimes, early in the morning, he watched the line of bodies moving out toward the fields, the way their backs bent in unison, the way their faces set. Sometimes, when he walked past the kitchen yard, he caught the sound of laughter not meant for his ears, quick, bright laughter that flickered on and off like a candle in the wind. There were lives around him he did not understand, stories he had never been told in full. Now, lying in bed, he thought he heard something else beneath the night noises of the house. A murmur. A dull, distant thump. He wondered if he was imagining it. After a while, curiosity won. He slipped out from under the blanket, his bare feet cold on the floorboards. The house settled around him with little sighs and creaks. He crept to the door, eased it open, and listened for his father's steps in the hall. Silence. Tom padded down the corridor, one hand trailing along the wall to steady himself. He passed the closed door of his parents' room, then the nursery that had held a crib once, long ago, before sickness took the baby that had slept there. He moved past the stairway that led up to the attic and instead took the one that curved down, toward the back of the house. At the bottom, the air felt cooler. A thin draft wound through the kitchen, where only a few embers glowed in the hearth. The servants had finished cleaning hours ago. The big pots stood empty, their bellies blackened from many fires. He crossed the stone floor, hesitated by the back door, then turned toward the narrow passage that led to the cellar steps. His heart hammered nervously against his ribs. He knew he shouldn't be here. His father had told him that the storage below was no place for children. But there was something tugging at him, a thread he felt he had no choice but to follow. At the end of the passage, the heavy door loomed up, darker than the shadows around it. The iron latch gleamed faintly. Tom approached and put his ear against the wood. For a moment, he heard nothing. Then, very faintly, he caught a sound that did not belong to storms or settling beams. A small, sharp squeak. Another. The quick, dry rustle of many small bodies in motion. Underneath it, barely audible, a different sound. A low, ragged exhale, the kind made by someone whose breath had forgotten how to be even. Tom stepped back, his throat suddenly tight. He pictured the rats they had trapped in the barn, the way their eyes had flashed, the furious energy in them. He pictured someone sitting down there, tied up, in the dark. "Who's there?" he whispered before he could stop himself. The words died against the door. No answer came, but the breath inside hitched once, as if the person had tried to speak and failed. Tom lifted his hand toward the latch, let it hover there, then let it fall. He was not strong enough to lift that bolt quietly, and even if he were, what would he do then? Lead whoever was below up into his father's rage? Stand between them and the man who had always been the center of his world? He had never stood between his father and anything. He backed away, step by slow step, until the light from the kitchen swallowed the door. Inside the cellar, time scratched itself into pieces. Isaac lost track of hours. He had only the changes in his own body to measure with. The way his muscles cramped, released, then cramped again, the way his throat grew drier with every swallowed breath, the way his mind tried to drift away from the present and he forced it back, again and again, because letting go felt too much like giving up. The rats tested him. They came closer, their claws pattering at the edge of his awareness. One scrambled across his boot. Another brushed the fabric at his calf. At first, they only touched cloth, curious, cautious. But there were many of them, and their hunger did not stay polite for long. A sharp sting bloomed along his ankle where skin lay close to bone. Another flared at his forearm where the sleeve had ridden up. Each pain was sudden, a white-hot point that stabbed and then faded into a throbbing ache. Isaac gritted his teeth and refused to cry out. Not because of pride. Pride was a luxury long since stripped from him. But there were ears out there, just beyond the door, ears that would savor the sound of his breaking. He would not feed them if he could help it. He thought of the fields at dawn, the way mist curled low over the cotton plants, hiding the ground, making every step uncertain. He thought of the first time Ruth had laughed around him, a real laugh, bright and loud, when he had made a clumsy joke about a rooster who seemed convinced he owned the sun. He thought of old Eben stories about a river far away, a river so wide and shining it looked like the road to heaven. Memory became a shield. But memory could not stop the cold from creeping into his bones, or the way fear did its slow work in his blood. Fear did not always shout. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it sat in the middle of a man's chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving, and everything else had to learn how to grow around it. There were moments, he could not say how many, when Isaac's mind slipped sideways. The cellar walls fell away. The darkness changed shape. In one of those moments, he was a boy again, small enough to hide behind his mother's skirt. He was in a different place then, a different stretch of earth under a different sky, but the sound of rats was the same. That restless scratch-scratch, the squeak of teeth on wood. His mother had set out traps and cursed under her breath in a language he had never learned fully, a music of words almost lost to him now. Some creatures only understand hunger, she had murmured, not knowing he was listening. They never get enough. They chew at everything they can reach. He wondered, sitting in the cellar years later, with his wrists bound and his skin a map of fresh and old pain, whether she'd been talking only about animals. At another time, the darkness closed around him so tightly he felt himself dissolving into it, becoming nothing but ears and skin and the faint, stubborn pulse in his chest. He couldn't remember his own name. He couldn't remember why he was there. All that existed was the next breath, and the one after that. A rat scurried across his lap, its claws catching on the fabric. He jerked involuntarily, his bound legs making the movement small and pathetic. The animal skidded away in alarm, then stopped, sniffed, and came back. It had learned now that this large shape in the center of the room did not strike, did not chase. It had learned that it could come closer. Isaac pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth and started, very softly, to hum. The tune came from nowhere he could name. It might have been a snatch of a hymn, or one of the work songs that floated over the fields like a thin net, holding people together when their hands were too busy to hold each other. It did not matter. The notes were low, almost inaudible, but they gave his mind something to follow that was not the movement of tiny bodies around him. His voice cracked. His throat burned. He hummed anyway. Above, the night thinned. The last guests rode away, their carriages rattling down the road. The candles in the parlor went out. Hollister retired to his room, his anger cooled by whiskey and by the knowledge that his will had been done. The house slept. Tom did not. He lay awake until the first grey of morning began to push against the edges of the window, then finally slipped into a shallow, troubled doze in which doors would not open and voices called his name from somewhere he could never quite see. When he woke, the sun was already up. Randall greeted the morning like a man starting a favorite task. He moved quickly, his boots biting into the dew-wet ground as he crossed the yard toward the cellar. One of his men trotted behind him, carrying a coil of rope just in case. "Think Hez still alive?" the man asked, trying to sound casual and failing. Randall shrugged, his mouth twisting into something like a grin. "If he is," he said, "then we can decide what to do with him next. If he ain't well, then the rats did a day's work for free." He slid back the bolt and pulled the door open. The smell that rolled out was stronger now, heavier with the sour tang of sweat and fear. A few rats darted up the stairs, their bodies brushing against his boots in their haste to escape the light. He stepped down, each footfall echoing slightly in the enclosed space. At the bottom, he raised his lantern. Isaac lay exactly where they had left him, in the center of the room. His head was bowed, his chin resting against his chest. His clothes were dirty, his sleeves torn in places where sharp teeth had tested the fabric, but there was less blood than Randall had expected. Just a few dark smears where bites had broken through to skin. The man's body trembled with small, involuntary shivers. "Isaac," Randall called, his voice flat. For a second, there was no response. Then Isaac's head lifted, slow as if it weighed more than the rest of him combined. His eyes opened. The pupils were huge, swallowing almost all the color, but they focused. They found Randall's face and stayed there. He was alive. Randall clicked his tongue, disappointed. "Look at you," he said. Still holding on. He crouched down, set the lantern on the ground, and grabbed a handful of Isaac's hair, pulling his head back. Isaac grunted, the first sound head made in hours other than the rasp of air. You remember anything you want to tell me now? Randall asked lightly. Any secrets you feel like sharing? Isaac's lips moved. The voice that came out was hoarse but clear enough. I remember I didn't take what wasn't mine, he said. Randall released his hair with a little shove that made his head thump against the wall behind him. Stubborn fool, he muttered. Maybe that quiet of yours ain't iron after all. Maybe it's just lead. Heavy and useless. He gestured for the other man to come closer. Untie him, he said. Master says if he's still brayer thin, we can put him back to work. Maybe leash him a little tighter for a while. The rope came away from Isaac's ankles first. The blood rushed back into his feet with 1,000 pins. He hissed, unable to stop himself. When they loosened the knots at his wrists, his hands fell forward like dead weight. He tried to flex his fingers, but they moved only a little, stiff and clumsy. Up, Randall snapped. Let's see if your legs remember how to stand. They hauled Isaac to his feet. The room tilted, then steadied. For a terrifying instant, he thought his knees would fold and refuse to hold him. But some stubborn thread inside him pulled taut, and he locked his legs. He would not fall here, in front of Randall. If he collapsed, it would be on his own terms. They marched him up the stairs into the daylight. The sun hit him like a blow. He squinted against the brightness, blinking rapidly as the world exploded back into color. The washed-out blue of the sky, the green of the grass along the edges of the yard, the pale dust of the packed earth. Everything looked too sharp, outlined in a way that made his eyes ache. The other slaves were already gathering in the yard, lining up in their work groups. Heads turned as Isaac emerged. He saw faces he knew, Ruth, old Eben, a dozen others who had shared jokes and songs and quiet, necessary silences with him. Their eyes widened. Some looked quickly away, fear snapping their gazes back to the ground. Others held his gaze for a heartbeat longer, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Tom stood just inside the doorway of the kitchen, frozen halfway between the inside and the out. He had followed Randall at a distance, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and something else he did not yet have a name for. When he saw Isaac, the breath caught in his throat. The man looked changed. Not his face, though that was pale beneath the brown of his skin, and streaked with dirt and dried sweat. Not his body, though he held himself straighter than someone who had spent the night among rats had any right to. It was something in his eyes. They were deeper now, farther away, like windows that had once looked onto a narrow yard and now opened onto a vast, dark sea. Move him out the way, Randall ordered. We got work to do. He can sit a spell and think about how much worse it could have been. They half-dragged, half-guided Isaac to the side of the yard and let him sink down against the wall of a shed. His legs folded with a grateful kind of weakness. Leaning his head back, he closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the roughness of the wood against his skull, the warmth of the sun on his cheeks. Someone slipped into the shadow beside him. A tin cup touched his lips, cool and miraculous. Water. Actual water. He opened his eyes. Ruth knelt there, her body shielding him from view as best she could. Her hand shook slightly as she pressed the cup to his mouth. Slow, she whispered. You drink too fast, you'll make yourself sick. He obeyed, taking small sips, letting each one sit in his mouth before swallowing. The water tasted like metal and earth and life. Thank you, he murmured, when the cup was empty. She glanced toward the yard. Randall was yelling at someone near the tool shed, his attention elsewhere, for now. Hollister stood on the porch, observing his kingdom with the detached satisfaction of a man inspecting a well-oiled machine. We heard nothing all night, Ruth said softly. No screams. Folks was listening. Some couldn't sleep. Eben kept saying he was waiting for you to cry out. Said if you cried out, he'd know you were still here with us, somehow. When he heard nothing, he said maybe that meant they finally broke you. Isaac let out a sound that might have been a laugh, if laughter could come out tired and torn. Maybe they did, he said. Maybe a part of me stayed down there. Hard to know yet. She searched his face, as if looking for cracks. What did they do to you? She asked. What was it like? Images flashed unbidden. The brush of fur, the bite of teeth, the way the darkness had felt like its own living creature, pressing in from all sides. The tremor in his own voice when he first realized he might be down there long enough to forget what the sky looked like. He shook his head once. "Doesn't matter," he said quietly. "What matters is I came back up." Ruth's eyes filled with hot, angry tears that she could not let fall. "They can't keep doing this," she whispered. "There gotta be an end, someday. There gotta be." Isaac looked past her toward the yard, toward the bent backs and tired faces, the rhythm of bodies moving toward another day of the same. Then his gaze shifted, just for a moment, to the kitchen doorway, where a small figure stood watching with an expression that did not match the others in the big house. Tom. Their eyes met. Tom felt something inside him jolt, as if someone had reached into his chest and given his heart a hard, unexpected push. He saw the exhaustion in Isaac's face, but he also saw something else, something that did not fit in any of the lessons had been taught about them and their nature. He saw a man. Not a tool. Not a hand. A man. Isaac held his gaze for a heartbeat, then looked back at Ruth. "Listen to me," he said, his voice just above a whisper. "All of you. Eben, you. The rest. You keep telling each other what you see. What they do. Don't let the stories die here." Ruth frowned slightly, not understanding. "What stories?" she asked. "Of nights like this," he said. "Of people like us. Of what we suffer, and how we get back up, even when we shouldn't be able to. One day, maybe not for us, but for somebody those stories might be the only thing left that proves we were more than what they tried to make us." He paused to catch his breath. The words cost him. But they were all he had to spend. "They can put you in the dark," he went on. "They can tie your hands, set the rats on you, take your name, your time, your body. But as long as someone remembers, really remembers, they ain't owned everything." Ruth nodded slowly. The idea sank into her like a seed falling into dry ground, finding a crack, a place to take root. "I'll remember," she said. "I promise." The day moved forward, dragging them with it. Isaac was given less to do than usual, under the excuse that a half-broken man was no use in the field. He spent most of the day near the sheds, mending tools, sorting bundles, doing quiet work that kept him in the shade. His body protested even that much. Every time he shifted, he discovered a new ache. Tom watched him whenever he could without being noticed. Questions piled up in the boy's head, jagged and unwelcome. Why had his father ordered such a thing? Why had Randall enjoyed it? If Isaac had done something truly terrible, why had he said so little in his own defense? And if he had done nothing at all, what did that mean about the world Tom had been taught to accept as right and natural? That night, as the house settled again into its familiar bones, Tom found he could not bear the silence. He stole a piece of paper from his father's desk, along with an old quill and a half-empty bottle of ink, and took them to his room. He did not know what he meant to write. He only knew that the images in his head would not leave him alone unless he tried to set them down somewhere outside his own mind. The first lines were clumsy, the ink blotting and smearing under his inexperienced hand, but eventually, the shape of the night began to appear. The heavy door, the stair, the sound of rats, the way Isaac had looked in the morning sun, as if the light itself hurt. He did not show what he wrote to anyone. Not his father, not his teachers, not even the kind-eyed tutor from the north who came twice a month to teach him geography and arithmetic and the proper way to address a letter. Time rolled on. Out in the wider world, wheels turned. Arguments grew teeth and rifles. Words like union and secession began to crackle in the air like distant thunder. Slavery, once the deep, unquestioned bedrock of this place, was being questioned elsewhere in voices loud enough to echo, faint but unmistakable, even this far away. On the plantation, the changes came slower. Work went on. People were bought and sold. Children were born and grew up in a world that told them, every day, in 1,000 small ways, exactly how little they belonged to themselves. Isaac carried the night in the cellar inside him like a stone. It did not stop him from laughing sometimes, real laughter, rare but bright, when someone said something so foolish or brave it cut straight through the fog of their days. It did not stop him from humming in the fields, from sharing a crust of bread with someone hungrier than he was, from standing silently beside a man who had just been whipped and letting his presence say what words could not. But there were moments when a sound, a scrape of claws in the barn, a door closing with a certain finality, would send a cold wave over him, from scalp to heel. In those moments, he felt the walls of the cellar around him again, and it took everything he had to remember that he was outside now, under a sky that nothing could cover completely. He lived long enough to see the first rumors of freedom creep across the rows like an unseasonal wind. Whispers that the war was ending. That men far away had signed papers with big, looping signatures, declaring that people like him were no longer to be bought and sold. At first, he did not believe them. He had seen too much to put trust in words. But then soldiers came, real ones, in dusty uniforms, carrying with them the smell of smoke and long marches and something fierce and exhausted in their eyes. They spoke in official tones to men like Hollister, handed them notices, letters, orders. And one day, the work stopped. Not forever, not completely. A field did not care what the law said, it still needed tending if anyone was to eat. But the shape of the days shifted, almost imperceptibly at first, then more boldly. People began to move differently. Some left outright, shouldering small bundles and stepping out onto roads they had never been allowed to choose for themselves. Others stayed, uncertain, trying to learn what it meant to stand in the same place under a different set of rules. The plantation changed hands. The white columns grew streaked and tired, their paint peeling in long, curling strips. The shutters that had once banged in the night finally tore loose in a storm and were never properly replaced. The cellar door sagged, its iron bolts rusting slowly, the darkness behind it growing dusty and cobwebbed instead of inhabited. Tom left before that happened. He went north, following an uncle who had written of opportunities in a city where ships came and went like migrating birds. He learned to keep books, to add long columns of numbers, to make money multiply on paper in ways that had nothing to do with fields at all. But he never quite left that yard. Never fully left the side of Isaac sitting in the sun with his wrists raw and his eyes deep. On nights when sleep would not come, he would unfold the old pages he had carried with him from the plantation, the ones on which he had written about that night in ink that had long since faded to a lighter brown. He would read them by lamplight and feel, once again, the young confusion that had driven his pen. He added to them, slowly, over the years. He wrote down other things he remembered. The rhythm of the songs in the fields, the way old Eben's voice shook when he told stories about the river, the half-smile Isaac got when a joke landed just right. He wrote about Hollister's rage, about Randall's whip, about the way entire lives could be uprooted and carried away in the back of a wagon like so much furniture. Sometimes his hands trembled as he wrote. Sometimes he had to stop and stare at the wall until his breath came back under his control. He did not write out of guilt, though that was there, a constant undertone. He wrote because Isaac had asked Ruth to remember, and Ruth had promised, and he had heard that promise with his own ears. He wrote because stories were a way of refusing to let certain truths sink under the surface and vanish. Years later, when Tom was no longer young, a woman stood at his door. She was in her 30s, maybe, with a face that carried both strength and lines of tiredness around the eyes. Behind her stood two children, a boy and a girl, their hands linked. "Are you Thomas Hollister?" she asked. "I am," he replied carefully, the old name tasting like dust. "My name is Ruth," she said. "Ruth Henderson now. I came from down south. From a place you used to know." The world narrowed for a moment. "Ruth," he repeated. "From the Hollister place?" "Not his place no more," she said with a flash of something like satisfaction. "But yes. From there." He invited her in. They sat at his table. The children watched with wide, quiet eyes as the adult spoke. "I heard you were alive," Ruth said. "Heard it from someone who heard it from someone. Took a long time to find you. Folks move, names change. But I kept at it." "Why?" Tom asked, genuinely puzzled. "What for?" She took a small bundle from the bag at her feet and unwrapped it. Inside, carefully folded, were pages, old, worn, the edges softened by many hands. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His own. "I got these from Eben," she said. "Before he passed. He said you gave them to him, day you left. Said you told him to keep 'em safe. After he was gone, they came to me. I read 'em. I kept 'em. I showed 'em to others. And I thought maybe the man who wrote this don't know what he did." Tom's throat felt tight. "I knew I gave them to him," he managed. "I did not know what became of them after. I thought maybe they were lost." She shook her head. "No," she said. "Not lost. They went from hand to hand. Out loud, mostly. Not everybody could read. But those who could, did. We read your words to each other, about that night. About Isaac in that cellar. About the rats and the dark and the morning after. We added our own words to them, with our mouths if not with ink. She leaned forward, her gaze steady. You kept your promise, she said. Tom blinked. Promise? He echoed. Maybe you didn't know it was one, she said. But I heard what Isaac said, that morning. I was right next to him. Don't let the stories die here, he said. Don't let Em own everything. You heard it too. You were standing in that kitchen door, weren't you? He nodded once, slowly. The memory came back vivid and sharp. I was. Well, Ruth said simply. You carried that story out. Wrote it down. Gave it to Eben. He gave it to me. I carried it here. His night in that cellar, it didn't stay buried. That's what he asked. Tom looked at the pages between them, the paper yellowed, the ink thin, the lines uneven but legible. He deserved more than that, he said quietly. He deserved everything the world could have given him and didn't, Ruth agreed. But this is something. It ain't nothing. The children shifted on their chairs. The little girl tugged at Ruth's sleeve. Mama, she whispered. Tell him the part about the song. Ruth smiled faintly. They like the part where you wrote he hummed to himself in the dark, she said to Tom. Says it scares Em, but in a good way. Makes Em think about being braver than they are. Tom swallowed past the lump in his throat. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know it would matter, any of it. I just had to put it somewhere. That's how it starts, Ruth said. Somebody says, I had to put it somewhere. And one day, somebody else reads it and says, I had to hear it. And so on. She folded the pages again, gently, carefully. I ain't here to thank you, she added. Not really. Isaac paid for those words with his flesh. You just wrote what you saw. But I thought you should know they ain't dead. They still walk around in folks' heads. Like he wanted. Tom nodded, his vision blurring for a moment. He blinked the tears away, not out of shame, but because he wanted to see clearly. Will you leave them with me? He asked. Just for tonight. There's more I'd like to add, if you'll let me. More I remember now, from hearing you speak. Ruth considered, then nodded. Just for tonight, she said. Then he'll take him back. They gotta keep moving. That's the deal. That night, under a lamp that burned lower than his father's ever had, in a house much smaller and humbler than the one with the white columns, Thomas Hollister, older now, shoulders bent by years rather than by whips, sat at a table and wrote again. He wrote about Ruth, standing in his doorway, carrying stories like a second heartbeat. He wrote about two children leaning forward, eyes wide, wanting to know what courage looked like in the dark. He wrote about a man named Isaac, who had spent a night with rats and fear and had come back to the sun with his humanity still somehow intact. He wrote about a promise made in whispers, kept in ink and memory. And somewhere, far away in time but close in the quiet places of the heart, the cellar door creaked open once more. Light poured down the stairs, washing over stone and dust and the faint, fading tracks of small, scurrying feet. The darkness did not vanish. Darkness never does. But it had been named now. Described. Burned into words that could not be entirely erased. Isaac's voice, rough and tired, echoed again in Tom's memory. Don't forget we're human. On the page, the words took a new shape. He was a man. And this was his night. And as long as someone told it, he would not be erased.